The folder slid across the brunch table so softly it almost made no sound at all. Julian's mother pushed it with 2 fingers, positioning it right between the dish of candied yams and the basket of dinner rolls as if she were offering me something polite. Her smile stayed in place, neat and cold. "We think this is best," she said before the wedding moves forward. For a second, nobody moved. Before I show you exactly how I turned this trap back on them, drop a comment and let me know. What is the most unreasonable rule a partner's family has ever tried to force on you? I am reading every single comment. I did not panic. I did not cry. I just looked at the leather-bound folder and calculated the cost of my own silence. For 2 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family. To Julian and to his parents, Kenneth and Linda, I was just Sloane, a quiet librarian who read too much and made barely enough to cover rent. That was the profile I had given them. The truth was, an entirely different balance sheet. I am a lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps. My daily life involves strategic planning, logistics for thousands of troops, and making decisions that carry lethal weight. But when I met Julian, I made a calculated choice to hide my rank. I had a deep-seated hunger for such untainted by the intimidation or the transactional respect that came with the uniform. I wanted an affection that did not require a salute. But playing small comes with its own invisible chains. When you spend your life surviving in high-pressure environments, you learn to adapt, to shrink your footprint to avoid unnecessary collateral damage. You begin to mistake endurance for strength. You convince yourself that absorbing the blows without flinching proves your resilience. But it is a prison of your own making. You play the role of the meek outsider because it is easier than fighting for your rightful space. I had let them treat me like a charitable write-off. I had let Julian's mother critique my worn coat and let his father dismiss my quiet demeanor, categorizing me as a low-value asset. I accepted this deficit because I wanted the illusion of family they promised. I had worn my oldest wool coat to this brunch. It was frayed at the cuffs, a deliberate costume choice to fit the narrative they had constructed for me. I sat there, bracing for their inevitable judgment, treating their disdain as a fixed operational cost. Julian sat next to me, tracing the rim of his water glass, offering zero support. He was the middleman in a very bad deal. Looking back, I realized that my desire for ordinary affection had blinded me to the glaring deficits in their character. Love had never been an equal partnership with them. It was a subscription model, and I was the one footing the emotional bill. But the arrival of this folder changed the entire equation. The numbness faded, replaced by absolute clinical clarity. Anger was not loud this time. It was a ledger coming into balance. I did not ask why. I simply recognized that the contract I thought we had was void. The quiet librarian was officially off the clock, and the strategist was clocking in. Kenneth cleared his throat, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He leaned forward, adopting the posture of a seasoned executive dealing with a slow-witted employee. "We are practical people, Sloane," he began, his voice dripping with practiced diplomacy. "We believe in transparency, and frankly, your financial situation is a liability." Linda nodded in agreement, her jewelry clinking as she rested her hands on the table. "Julian comes from a certain pedigree," she added. "We have invested heavily in his upbringing, his education, his entire future. You, on the other hand, have a librarian's salary, and we assume significant debt. We cannot allow our family's assets to be compromised." I looked at the folder, then at Julian. He stared at his plate, remaining completely silent. The silence was not shock, it was complicity. They were demanding that I sign a prenuptial agreement designed to strip me of any marital assets before the marriage even began. It was disguised as a standard legal precaution, but the terms were absolute forfeiture. If we divorced, I would leave with nothing. If Julian was at fault, I would leave with nothing. They framed their greed as logical risk management. This is the trap of practicality. Toxic people rarely present their malice as outright cruelty. They package it as common sense. They use the language of accounting and pragmatism to justify their exploitation. By calling this contract a practical necessity, they absolve themselves of their moral bankruptcy. They weaponized their wealth, treating Julian's privileged upbringing as a debt that I was somehow responsible for repaying through my own submission. They were telling me that my inclusion in their family was a loan, and this contract was the collateral. We are paying for the entire wedding, Kenneth pointed out, tapping the folder with a manicured finger. $200,000 is a significant capital output. Consider this document your contribution to the family. Since you cannot match us financially, you can at least offer us security. Security, they did not want a daughter-in-law. They wanted an indemnified asset. I did not blink. I did not show an ounce of the panic they were so desperate to see. I simply processed the data. They were operating under the assumption that I was penniless, desperate, and entirely dependent on their charity. They believed their financial leverage gave them the right to treat my dignity as a negotiable term. They were not shocked by what they were doing. They expected me to simply sign away my future because they calculated that I had no other options. I read the first few clauses with a detached clinical eye. They were trying to short sell my future to protect their present. The audacity was almost impressive, an accounting trick designed to bankrupt my self-worth. Every clause was a reminder that love, to them, was a hostile merger. I closed the folder smoothly. I did not raise my voice. I merely evaluated the battlefield. Cassandra, Julian's younger sister, sat across from me, treating the brunch like her own personal coronation. She was wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her phone constantly in hand as she documented her curated existence. She had not looked at me once since the folder was presented. To her, I was simply an administrative hurdle in the grand production of her brother's wedding. So, are you going to sign it or what? Cassandra asked, finally looking up, her tone laced with profound boredom. Because we need to finalize the floral budget by Tuesday, and Mom says we cannot move forward until the legalities are locked down. I observed the family dynamic with absolute clarity. Julian and Cassandra were both products of a system that rewarded compliance with capital. But Julian was the golden child, the prized asset. This entire marriage was not a union, it was a status play. They were acquiring a quiet, compliant wife to make Julian look grounded and benevolent, while ensuring I had no actual power. But the golden child dynamic is incredibly fragile. It relies entirely on everyone playing their assigned roles. The golden child must remain flawless, and the outsiders must remain inferior. The family feared me not because I was a librarian, but because my quiet independence was a variable they could not control. They needed to force my submission through this contract to stabilize their own insecure hierarchy. If I did not need their money, their entire system of control would collapse. I looked directly at Cassandra. Tell me, Cassandra, I said, my voice smooth and unemotional. If the floral budget is so critical, why are you relying on my signature to release the funds? I thought Kenneth and Linda were the sole financiers of this operation. Cassandra bristled, her perfect posture stiffening. We are financing it. We just want to make sure the investment is protected. And how exactly does stripping me of all future assets protect your flowers? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Is Julian's fidelity so unstable that you need a 30-page insurance policy just to buy centerpieces? Kenneth slammed his hand on the table, the silverware rattling. That is enough, Sloane. You will not disrespect my daughter. I was not disrespecting her, I replied smoothly. I was auditing her logic. Their collective anxiety spiked. The air in the room grew dense. By asking two simple questions, I had forced them to defend their indefensible greed. They were projecting strength, but I could see the panic in their micro-expressions. They needed me to break. They needed me to cry and sign the document so they could feel powerful again. I analyzed Julian's face. He looked pale, his eyes darting between me and his father. He was terrified of losing his inheritance. He was a depreciating asset, completely reliant on his parents' portfolio. The fragile golden child was cracking under the pressure of a single calm inquiry. They expected a breakdown. I gave them a balance sheet. I was setting the stage for the final transaction, gathering the last pieces of data I needed before I dismantled their entire corporate structure. Let us discuss the drafting of this contract, I said, placing my hand flat on the leather folder. Linda offered a tight, patronizing smile. It was drafted by our family attorney. He is a highly respected relative of Julian's. It is completely standard. It is a masterpiece of financial engineering, I agreed. But it is far from standard. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek black digital voice recorder, placing it deliberately on the table next to the candied yams. Its red light blinked in a steady, methodical rhythm. Kenneth's face drained of color. "What is that? Are you recording this?" Since the moment I sat down, I replied smoothly. "We are in a public dining room. Kenneth, there is no expectation of privacy here, making this recording fully admissible when I hand it over to the authorities. In my line of work, we document all hostile engagements." Before anyone could protest, I pulled a crisp blue folder from my bag and slid it across the table. It was my turn to present terms. "Let us talk about your highly respected family attorney. 2 days ago, I ran a background check on this document's metadata and the associated trust accounts listed in Clause 14. I did not use a standard background check. I used military-grade cyber analytics." Julian stared at the blue folder as if it were a live grenade. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I found a kickback scheme," I stated cleanly, devoid of any emotion. "Clause 14 mandates that all disputed marital assets be held in an escrow account managed by your attorney's firm. However, the routing numbers hidden in the fine print direct a mandatory 5% management fee straight into a private offshore account, an account owned exclusively by your attorney." The silence in the dining room was absolute. The clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables seemed to fade away. "Your family attorney is not protecting your assets," I continued, maintaining eye contact with Kenneth. "He is skimming them. And by using his firm to channel these unverified offshore funds, your family business isn't just cutting a bad deal, you are actively participating in tax evasion and corporate money laundering. This was not revenge. It was accounting. I was exposing the criminal twist in their practical business model. They had tried to trap me in a financial snare, completely unaware that the snare was rigged to bleed them dry." Linda's mouth opened and closed, struggling to find air. "That is impossible. We trust him. He is family. Trust is a liability when you do not verify the ledger," I replied. "Your family business meeting is actually a fraudulent enterprise. You tried to force a legally binding contract on me to secure your wealth while your own relative was setting you up for embezzlement." The arrogance they had worn so comfortably just minutes prior was disintegrating. They had viewed me as a naive, helpless target. They were entirely unprepared for a tactical counteroffensive. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of panic. I simply laid out the facts, executing the lethal discovery with the precision of a drone strike. I watched their reality fracture. Kenneth picked up my blue folder with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the irrefutable banking records I had compiled. The numbers did not lie. Their grand strategy to neutralize the poor librarian had just exposed them to massive criminal liability. I had let them dig their own grave. And now I was simply handing them the invoice. Kenneth dropped the papers, his arrogant executive persona completely shattered. "Who do you think you are?" he demanded, though his voice lacked any real authority. It was the frantic defense of a cornered man. I reached into my bag one final time. The quiet librarian facade had outlived its operational usefulness. It was time to terminate the alias. I withdrew my United States Marine Corps military ID along with my official command orders, placing them directly on top of their fraudulent contract. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sloane," I said, my voice dropping to a command register that demanded absolute compliance. "I oversee strategic logistics and defense contracts for the military. I hold a high-level security clearance between my military compensation and the private family trust I personally manage from my late grandfather's estate. My net worth eclipses your son's entire trust fund." "I do not need your money, Kenneth. I make more in a quarter than Julian does in a year." Julian stared at my military identification, his jaw slack. "You lied to me. I omitted irrelevant data to see if you were capable of basic human decency," I corrected. "You failed the test." The power dynamic did not just shift. It inverted completely. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. The terror in Linda's eyes was palpable. She was looking at a woman who could dismantle her entire social standing with a single phone call. "Here is the new contract," I stated, tapping the table for emphasis. "Tomorrow morning, I will forward this entire blue folder, along with the audio recording of your extortion attempt, to the State Bar Association. Your attorney will be disbarred. I will also forward copies to the local press and the district attorney's fraud division. Kenneth turned a sickly shade of gray. Please, he choked out, the arrogance entirely replaced by desperation. You cannot do that. It will destroy our family. It will ruin our reputation. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. You destroyed your own reputation when you decided greed was more important than integrity, I replied coldly. I am simply delivering the audit. I stood up, my posture rigid and commanding. The frayed wool coat I wore no longer looked like a symbol of poverty. It looked like camouflage. Julian reached out, his hand trembling. Sloane, please, we can fix this. I love you. Love is not a contract negotiated under duress, Julian, I said, looking down at him. I am canceling the subscription. I gathered my military documents, my ID, and my voice recorder, leaving their fraudulent contracts sitting beside the candied yams. The mission was complete. The retaliation was clinical, unemotional, and absolute. I walked past Cassandra, who was staring at me in terrified silence, her phone completely forgotten. The golden child was paralyzed by a reality she could not document or filter. I walked out of the restaurant with the precise, measured stride of a commanding officer. The conflict had begun at 12 noon, and by 12:15, the enemy forces were entirely neutralized. There was no hesitation. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of a closed account. The afternoon sun felt surprisingly warm as I stepped out of the restaurant and onto the pavement. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant, unclouded blue. I walked to my car, the sounds of traffic washing over me, washing away the toxic atmosphere of the brunch I had just dismantled. I did not feel the need to look over my shoulder. The ties were severed, the contract was nullified, and the accounts were permanently closed. I had walked into that building playing the role of an outsider, a quiet librarian bracing for the inevitable condescension. I walked out as myself. Driving away, the adrenaline of the tactical strike began to fade, replaced by a profound and steady calm. I've come to realize that rank, whether it is military, financial, or social, is just a costume we wear. It is the uniform society uses to categorize us, to decide who is valuable and who is expendable. But integrity, that is the skin you live in. You cannot buy it, you cannot inherit it, and you certainly cannot draft a prenuptial agreement to secure it. Julian's family had all the wealth and status in the world, but their skin was paper thin, hiding a deep, decaying emptiness. For a long time, I wanted to belong to their world. I hid my strength because I thought my authentic self was too intimidating, too much of a liability to be loved simply and normally. But hiding your strength to make weak people comfortable only guarantees your own suffocation. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. I forgive myself for playing small. I forgive myself for believing, even for a second, that my worth was determined by their skewed ledger. To anyone listening who has ever felt like they are standing on the periphery, looking in at a world that refuses to accept them, this is my letter to you. The ones who always feel marginalized, pushed to the edges of the room, I know the ache of not belonging. I know the heavy, quiet exhaustion of trying to fold yourself into a shape that fits someone else's expectations. You sit at their tables, you endure their subtle jokes, you wear the frayed coat, and you wait for the day they finally decide you are enough. You shrink your dreams, lower your voice, and accept their crumbs, convincing yourself that conditional love is better than no love at all. But it is a lie designed to keep you subservient. Please hear me when I say this. You are already enough. You do not need their validation to confirm your intrinsic value. The edge of the room is not a place of weakness. It is a vantage point of absolute clarity. From the edge, you can see the entire battlefield. You can see the cracks in their golden facades, the desperate insecurities driving their cruelty, and the profound tragedy of their transactional lives. Do not trade your integrity for a seat at a toxic table. Build your own table. Find your own worth, independent of their shallow metrics and posturing. You have a quiet, fierce resilience inside you, forged in the fires of everything you have survived. Do not let them turn your empathy into a liability. Cut the invisible chains of their expectations, walk away from their empty promises, and step fully into your own power. You are not a charity case. You are not a burden, and you are definitely not an outsider in your own life. You are the sole architect of your own brilliant legacy. If this story gave you the chills or reminded you that your boundaries are your power, please share this video. You never know who might need this reminder today. Don't forget to hit follow for more stories about quiet strength. I will be here waiting for you.